Hi everybody, my name is Andy and I am doing my PowerPoint presentation on the HIV education and prevention for African women was the prompt that I chose. So let's get started. First, I'd like to go over some history. So some basic information. HIV is a human immunodeficiency virus. It's transferred through blood and fluids from sexual intercourse. Basically, the virus attacks our immune system until we can't fight off normal infections that our body deals with on a daily basis. Another word to be knowledgeable about is, acronym is AIDS, which is the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So HIV is the virus that transitions into AIDS. It transitions into AIDS at a certain point when your immune system becomes so low, and that's when the name changes. So some statistics: 36.7 million people were living worldwide with AIDS HIV and AIDS at the end of 2016. 1.8 million individuals became infected with HIV in 2016. 1 million people died from AIDS-related illnesses. And then out of the people in the world that have HIV or AIDS, only 60% know that they have the virus. 40% do not know. And that has many reasons, but most often is access to testing in healthcare. So a big statistic that's going to be prevalent and important to my demographic is that 2/3 of the people living with HIV and AIDS are actually in Africa. So for signs and symptoms, first off, the only way that you know that you have HIV or AIDS is if you get tested and you get a positive result. Symptoms for HIV and AIDS can be really iffy in the beginning. A lot of flu-like symptoms happen during early HIV right after transmission, usually 2 to 6 weeks after transmission. They can be fevers, chills, rash, night sweats, muscle aches, sore throat, fatigue, and then all the lymph node, mouth kind of stuff that happens when you get the flu. Late stage is when you're progressing to AIDS, and it has a lot of congruent symptoms with like late stage cancer. I think it's general of your body just shutting down pretty much, but rapid weight loss, recurring fever, night sweats, extreme fatigue, swelling in the glands, diarrhea, and sores, and then really common is pneumonia. So some learning needs assessments that have to be done for my population. First and foremost, for the African population is geographic access to healthcare services. A lot of the people that I might be talking to might not be in a city, might not be near a clinic. It could be impossible for them to get to the doctor. Maybe they rely on traditional medicine for their healthcare needs. So that's going to be a really important thing to go over first and assess for that. Another really important learning needs assessment tool will be the socioeconomic status. So regardless of just being, let's see, impoverished, having a decreased socioeconomic status, particularly for women in Africa and women with HIV in Africa, it puts them at risk for coercion and transactional sex. So these women are low income, are impoverished essentially, and a lot of times they marry so that they can have the assistance and help, and then they get into bad relationships and are coerced essentially into having unprotected sex, maybe not even married, just coerced into unprotected sex. The rate of rape is very, very high in African countries. And then also transactional sex. I mean, these women are doing whatever they can to stay alive and maybe help their families. And it'd be much easier to be coerced again into these types of situations. So that's a really, really important piece that I found in my research that I might not have considered just about socioeconomic status in general. So again, kind of tying back into the geographic access to healthcare services, untreated genitourinary infections actually increase the risk of contraction of viral infections. So while our body can actually do a pretty good job of fighting off viruses, even HIV, when we have UTIs or vaginal infections or vaginal trauma or any type of issue in that general region, we actually put ourselves at a much higher risk for contraction than we would have before. So how does this tie in? Well, if they don't have access to a clinic and they have a UTI and it's just something that their body kind of deals with, they don't even know that it's something that they need to get taken care of to be able to prevent against HIV. It's really important. The last kind of big one is a fear of repercussions and stigmatization. So again, we sort of tie back into that socioeconomic status. If you have somebody who's sort of in charge of your decisions in your life, or if you're in a fearful situation or anything like that, there might be repercussions for seeking out medical care. And also it might, maybe your partner looks down on you for going and getting testing and treatment. There's lots of issues as far as that is concerned. So how do we adapt to ensure a more successful education pattern? We definitely need to screen for prior education and baseline first and foremost. See where everybody stands with their knowledge about HIV and contraction and prevention and all that sort of stuff. And then defining needs and deficits. So if they know a lot about prevention, but they don't know a lot after they've already contracted, figuring out where the line is between needs and deficits for each individual person. And then tying back into the socioeconomic again, figuring out their barriers and interpersonal issues to education that's preventing them from maybe finding this information out or for seeking services. And then definitely providing information on all medical services available to them and in as much detail as possible. When you live in rural or impoverished areas, it takes planning to be able to go seek out services. And it's not just something you can just run down to the clinic or the minute clinic at your Rite Aid. It could take a day, could take 2 days, depending on where you're from. You might have to save up money if you don't have it. So really being able to give as much information as possible is very, very important for medical services. I chose to use Orm's self-care deficit model. It's kind of composed of 3 different ideologies. There's self-care requisites, so all the things that are required for us to maintain our self-care. And self-care deficits, which are all the things that sort of inhibit us from having optimum self-care. And then the theory of nursing systems. So in utilizing Orm's self-care deficit model, the model could be applied. This is just a general overview of how I would apply the model. So first and foremost, being tested for HIV and then finding out all options in great detail first. Then receiving medical treatments, which is actually going and doing what has to be done on the medical side. Following the plans set to achieve goals. So mutual goal planning between the presenter and the population, and then following those plans and creating a plan that's actually doable for the people that we're trying to help. We can't have elaborate goals. Well, we shouldn't be the ones planning the goals. It should definitely be collaborative, but also we can't make elaborate plans for people who don't have access to the necessities to complete these plans. So then reevaluating health goals and ideals. Sometimes people's ideas and goals change, and we have to rechange our plans and our assistance to them based off that. And then also reaching a place of acceptance of diagnosis and creating coping systems and support. A lot of HIV treatments are doing very well. In our country, even more so, but there are a lot of promising treatments and people are sustaining much longer lives with HIV, but it's still a very stigmatized and a very emotional diagnosis to receive. So we really have to create education and an environment for these people where we accept this diagnosis and we help them with how they can deal with it. So some goals and some outcomes. So my goal would be for women attending the educational seminar to know their HIV status through testing as soon as possible after the seminar is done. If I was able to provide the ourselves there, as long as it was private, that would totally be a great goal. Then being able to verbalize their basic healthcare needs and lifestyle regarding an HIV diagnosis. So patient will, and then these are outcomes, excuse me. So from the goal, patient will obtain HIV status if they do not already know it. Patient will verbalize all necessary prevention steps, and then intervention steps if they are HIV positive. Patient will adhere and participate in medical recommendations regarding diagnosis in spite of fear of retribution in the goal to maintain their health. So those are my outcomes. Some research. I used 3 resources. The first I used was HIV Basics, which is an article on HIV.org, and that mostly is where I got my information for the statistics and presenting, as well as latent symptomology. That was a great screenshot, essentially, of HIV worldwide. I used nursing care and specialized HIV/AIDS outpatient services. So that's kind of where I got my goals for the HIV seminar, and then what interventions were necessary to provide care for HIV patients. And finally, and excuse me, this is a very long title to an article, but I used assessing and evaluating the combined impact of behavior and biological risk factors for HIV seroconversion in a cohort of South African women. This basically gave me the information that I needed to know about specifying my education plan to African women. A lot of that information I didn't know before I researched. A lot of it was really good, really great stuff that helped me kind of understand the struggles that these women face, more than just being in the country that has the highest rate of HIV and all the other poverty and wars and the things that they struggle with, but specifically how they could even struggle more than that. Really gave me an insight into some things that I would need to know to present this information. I looked up a lot of evaluation tools. This was a little hard for me, I'll be very honest. So I chose to use the Patient Education Materials Assessment Tool, which is that. They use that for multimedia. So PowerPoints, that sort of thing. I thought that'd be pretty ideal for this situation. And it's basically a survey that you could give orally or written, and it asks them about, how does this presentation look? How easy was it to read? How was the information? Were you able to absorb? All sorts of critical questions about how your presentation was given. So, and then obviously there has to be physical health evaluation, not just how was my presentation. So we would need to check back in if we were over there for an extended period of time. We need to host another seminar where we check back in with the patients that we provided the service to, at least open the door to them, to see if they completed their HIV status and see the prospective treatment options and answer any questions about things that maybe needed clarification again. It's very important. So, in conclusion, I think from that third article that I was telling you about, that gave me a lot of insight to things that I didn't know about sort of the issue with HIV treatment for women in Africa. I think probably the biggest thing about moving forward with this would be taking into consideration those fears and repercussions that they face in trying to get tested or even get treatment for HIV. So I think making these seminars and or treatment options as safe and anonymous and discreet as possible. The world doesn't have HIPAA. We're very lucky to live in a place that kind of guards our healthcare information with our lives, essentially. The healthcare workers do. It's such a serious thing, but anywhere else, maybe they don't have that. And so we really need to provide like some very safe places where this can be done. Um, and with that combat, not just safe, but accessible. And that will take a lot of work, but I think that would be the first place to start in helping this specific patient population. Is you have to address those barriers. If you can't address the barriers, then the information can never be provided, essentially. These are my references. They'll be posted on the PowerPoint presentation to look over. All great articles. And that is it. Thank you so much, guys.